No, hold on. There we go. Welcome, everybody. And this is, of course, the latest episode of WICT Wednesdays. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Anne Thompson, the president of the DC Baltimore WICT Women in Cable Telecommunications Chapter. And I'm very happy to welcome my friend Mindy Slovinsky, amazing all-around person. And we are going to talk about the psychology of the athlete. Specifically tackling a 100-miler. Now, Mindy, I knew was amazing because I knew she had ran a 100-miler trail run. What I didn't realize was that she's doubly amazing because she's actually run 2 back to back.
Doubly stupid.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly does a 100-mile race entail? Like, how long of a time do you have to do it? How many runners? For some reason, I have this idea in my head that it's like you say, I'm going to do it, and then they set up the whole thing for like you or like you and a friend.
Yeah. Every race is different. Most of them have like time limits because they don't want people out there just doing it forever. And that could range anywhere from, 32 hours. Some of the hardest races in the country. There's one called Hard Rock out in Colorado that's like 40 some hours. And then there's some that have really like 28 hours or 30 hours. So that's kind of the range, that sort of time period. There are some races, there's sort of like the Boston Marathon of ultras is Western States out in California. And they will have, and a lot of other races do this too, but they'll have like sort of different levels of like, if you do it in 24 hours, you get this super special, the big prize that everyone is doing this crazy thing for is a belt buckle. So you get a certain color, certain kind of super fancy belt buckle if you do it in less than 24 hours and so on. So some races kind of have it divvied up that way. The one that I co-direct with my friend, ours is 32. We have a 32-hour cutoff, which is pretty generous because we want first timers and people just kind of tackling it for the first time to have a good shot at doing it.
Yeah. And is it it's multiple people running, right? It's not
multiple, yep. Set them free, just like the start of any race. And it varies. It could be, some of the races are like 20 people, some of them are hundreds, so it's just like any race. Most of them are trail races. I think there are some, non-trail ultras. So that could look all different too. Could be point to point, could be a big giant loop, could be lots of little loops or laps. So everyone's kind of set forth in the morning and like, we'll see it when you come home. Like,
that's interesting. So how did you begin running? I think I remember the story. It involved a pair of borrowed sneakers in college.
Yeah, you have a good memory. I was absolutely not a runner or an athlete. Bill can attest to this. I was a hardcore band geek. I took marching band way too seriously. And I was busy, playing my trumpet in the jazz band and not thinking about sports. And I think I had a friend that was just like, hey, let's go run around the track. And that seemed like a good idea. I borrowed a friend's shoes and sort of started doing it. And it was always the people that over the years, I still don't really even think of myself as an athlete, but I think the groups that I found myself with were what kept me. A group I met in Philadelphia when I lived there, they kind of got me doing, I heard about marathons and found out people could actually do them and survive. And so that sounded like an idea I wanted to try. And then, I fell in with the trail running group and had a really good friend and made a really good friend through that. And so we ran our first 100 together.
Oh, okay.
So it's always been the community for me, at least, and the people that have kind of kept me around.
Yeah, well, actually, I found an article on runnersworld.com that talks about the motivations of runners, and ultra running group specifically the focus was about motivated by racing with friends on top of travel and the personal records. So as a runner, obviously you mentioned that that was your motivation, but also as a race director, do you find that's pretty prevalent with the community, that it's really has to do with the community?
I absolutely, you know, it's I know there's been lots of interesting descriptions. There's someone like it's a, you know, it's a 28-hour party and you're just sort of like going from buffet to buffet, you know, like most races are set up with aid stations. So you run anywhere between 4 and 7 miles usually, and you'll sort of come to this like little refuge in the woods where there's a table set up and a tent and drinks and food, and that goes all night long. So you're sort of on this journey, and every so many miles you sort of come up to this aid station. So there's a huge sense of community, of people helping you through this journey, the volunteers. I think everyone sort of appreciates what you're taking on. And the one thing that you kind of mentioned that you were thinking about too were like the pacers. So a lot of times folks will have someone that runs with them after a certain amount of time. And that's all, again, different allowances for different races. But essentially it's like someone to keep you like conscious, awake, moving forward, motivated, company, whatever, after, you know, 75 miles, or, you know, when it's getting real dark. And so you're running all night. Some people will stop and, you know, take a cat nap depending on how much time they have, but most people press on, and you're just running all night, put your headlamp on, and the sun comes up and you keep on running. So
Just what goes into it is just amazing to me. So you're also a psychologist, and obviously to run an ultra marathon, there has to be a certain level of physical fitness that takes preparation and training. But what kind of mental preparedness does an athlete have to do when attempting something like this?
yeah, that is such a great question. And I think people think like it's sort of this magic bullet, you know, like I just have to get into the right mindset, or I have to think the right things, or I have to have a mantra or something like that. And at least in my experience and just being around it as a director or as a participant or as a pacer or a crew member or whatever, I think it's really, the things I think about are sort of being realistic about your training. It doesn't have to be, there's plenty of like really basic training plans out there that folks can do. And I think a lot of times people will sort of wing it. So there's sort of the mental, there's kind of a sort of different categories I was thinking of like the kinds of folks that you see. Some people will be like, well, I'll just see how it goes. I think I trained enough. And then it's kind of easy to drop at some point during the race. There's people that are trained but get stuck in their heads. And this is the part where I think, again, you can't really, having realistic goals ahead of time always makes sense, even though that sounds really generic, of like, if you just want to finish, then you just want to finish. Because so many things can happen along the way that you don't anticipate. There's people who, you know, we kind of say like, are you hurt or are you hurting? You know, there's sort of like, I can't go because apparently I've dislocated my knee, or, you know, there's something that's really, really wrong, which is pretty rare. I think it's very, very easy when you're tired and stressed and kind of in that place to start believing all the demons in your head, all the stories about, I'm going to hurt myself more, or why am I doing this? This isn't worth it. Or I don't know why, I don't want to do this anymore. So I think it's easy to give in to your mind. And I don't think it's a matter of not thinking those things, because you're going to think them. I think it's more a matter of just kind of watching them show up. And this is kind of what I do, what I tell my clients, and in my practice of just regular therapy, of like, it's very easy to get swept away by that feeling like reality, instead of, you know, sort of coming back and kind of grounding yourself and being present. So I don't know if that answer, I think when you say like sort of preparation, I think it's sort of be realistic, you know, like why, do you really know why you're doing this? If you don't know, that could be a bad road. If you are doing it for somebody else, if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, you know, I think that the wheels can come off pretty quickly if that's the case.
Yeah, and something you said when you described the different kind of races, and one was going around a loop, or I forget how you phrased it, but in researching for this and the questions, I came across a wiki page of something I had run across in the past. It's called the Selftranscendent, and I am not stuttering with my numbers here, everyone else, 3,100-mile race. And it's all conducted over 52 days, and it's literally circling one Queens, New York block, just over and over and over and over again. And I just find the whole thing fascinating. And I love the fact that they have to do it while dodging pedestrians and cyclists. Like, it's just a normal day on the block, right? Except it's 52 and they're running around in circles. But one of the race goals is that it challenges runners to transcend their previous capacity. And one of your focus areas in your practice is helping people realize their physical potential. And have you been able, I guess you have been able to help people in your practice with that, but that's kind of what you were just talking about, getting to the point where you're letting your head get in the way, the demons in your head get in the way.
Yeah, I've heard of this race before, and I've actually seen some footage. A friend of mine actually is a documentary maker. He did a great, and I'll give you guys the link. I think it's called Just One Step. And it's sort of exactly the question, like, why do we run? Why do people run? And they cover that race. And I have another friend who's actually considering doing it. And I think it's the way I sort of think of it, and this is sort of my therapist mind and sort of mindful meditation mind, is kind of like, it's sort of like a 51-day retreat, where you're just sort of testing, can I get out of my head? Can I keep getting out of my head over and over and over and over again? And I just happen to be running at the same time. So I think that's kind of how I see it. Other people may see it a different way. I think it feels a lot less like running to me, with that sense of self-transcendence and more of a mental challenge. Can I keep doing, what happens when I do the same thing over and over and over again?
Yeah, and that's an interesting concept. Well, those were my prepared questions. So I'm going to turn it over to the group and see if anybody has any questions for Mindy. This was fascinating.
This is Svetlana. I had a question. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. I can't see.
All right. I'll turn on my video. All right, hi. So very fascinating. Congratulations. It's like you're a superstar. I worked 3 days straight. I've never run 3 days straight, so it's pretty amazing. I guess my question is, for those of us less ambitious, like who want to run like their first 5K or 10K, what advice might you have for those people in terms of mental training, physical training, and kind of pushing yourself to accomplish kind of the smaller scale runs?
Yeah, it's so funny because the first thing we think about when we think about like 5K or 10K is like the actual running part, like how would I actually physically do this? And it's funny because I think like, well, there's sort of basic training plans out there. Runner's World, you can find a training plan. I think having a plan, and there's plenty of if you've never done this before, walk a little bit, run a little bit, that sort of get your body, to that place. And I would say find a friend, do it with a friend, have somebody to run with. There's nothing better or that will fill your soul more than running with a friend and talking about everything under the sun, usually other than running. And so having somebody that you're going to do it with, if you're into that, I think that there's a lot of motivation that comes from just like getting up and just sort of training yourself to make a commitment to doing this thing that you're not used to doing when somebody else is there helping you, or that you're like, okay, we got to meet at 6 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock at night. I'm going to meet my friend and we're going to do our 3 miles or something. And I think once you sort of crack that open, that it's a thing, you really find that you can just keep doing it. And you find yourself meeting more people. I think the way I sort of got into longer and longer distances, I never, if you would have told me I would run 100 miles like in high school, let alone like in my 20s or 30s, I would have said you were crazy. It wasn't in my it wasn't in my repertoire of a thing that could even happen. But as I sort of met people and I sort of watched them do it, and I paced people and I crewed for people and I kind of saw it happen, it starts to sort of seep in of like, well, maybe I could do this, you know? So there's sort of that piece too of, you don't have to convince yourself. I think it's, you just sort of start doing it. Do I like this? Do I want to do more of it? What happens at a race? Do I like races? You know, I think that's what yeah.
Any other questions?
Hi, Mindy. This is Rob Stoddard. Thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate that. I can't help but focus on the physical aspect of all of this. I've run short distances in my lifetime, but I've never trained for a marathon. I've known people who've trained for marathons, and boy, that seems pretty damn rigorous. I'm thinking about what it would take to do something 2 or 3 times that length and that distance. So can you just share with us a little bit what some of the physical challenges are and how you physically prepare yourself? And also, after any one of these races, what recovery looks like as well?
That's a great question. Those are great questions. I can tell you for the ultras, and again, I always want to preface this of like, I am no speedy Mick Peterson, you know, I'm total mid-packer out there. And the generic, I would say, training sort of looks like 2 really long runs on the weekends, and then, you know, maybe 3 or 4 runs during the week. So the real training, the real meat of it is those long runs. So you're just kind of training your body, and this could range probably anywhere from like, you know, a 12-mile run up to like a 28-mile run. Usually the one like super generic, like a Saturday run would be like the long run day. And then the Sunday run is like a smaller portion of that. So you're kind of training your body to run on tired legs. So all the work you did the day before, you're kind of like sort of continuing that. That's sort of the meat of it. And then during the week, people will just put miles in, kind of just to get time on their feet. Now the super speedy people, and I mean, there's some very intricate training plans and speed work and things that they're really, really doing to train themselves to run it fast. But I would also say too, the running part, you're not running as hard as you can for 100 miles. So there's walking, there's power hiking, there's, I think that's something to keep in mind too. When you hear about this stuff, you think of like, you at least for me, I'm like picturing the marathoners running on TV and like, oh my God, they're going to do that for 100 miles. You know, and some of the super amazing guys and girls actually do that. But for the general pop, which is me, you're running, you get tired, you walk a little bit, you power hike, you run. So you try to, you know, there's a mix of stuff too. And the recovery, it usually depends on how much you've trained. If you've trained pretty well, recovery could be, for me, it was like some aches and pains, you know, a lot of stiffness and soreness for a couple of days, and then just kind of being tired. So fatigue hung out with me for like maybe a couple of weeks and then kind of went away. So I think that's a lot of people's experience. So it sounds a lot crazier than it really is, because I think our bodies are really, and I'm not a, you know, exercise physiologist, but our bodies are kind of pretty resilient. like you can sort of get out there and hike for a long, long time if you did. So I think that's something to keep in mind too. It sounds, I know when I was training for my first 50-mile race, I was running with my friend who had done these before, and we were finishing up like a 15-mile run. And I was like, I'm so beat up. Like, I feel like someone threw me down a flight of stairs. I really don't see how. I was sure, I'm like, there's no way I could run 50 miles. And she's like, you know, you just do. And it sounds kind of crazy, but like, and we did. You just kind of keep moving, and your body kind of catches you, and just kind of keeps moving. So yeah.
So to that point, I don't know, maybe this is the philosophical question. What do you take from all of this and apply to your life or to your job? Does it provide you tools for a better life? What can you tell us about that?
I think I really surprised myself of digging deep. You know, the first race that we did, I was sure that we weren't going to finish, and I was ready to, you know, I didn't think we were going to make our cutoff. You have to, you know, get in by a certain time. So I think for that, I really surprised myself of like being able to do something I never thought I could be able to do. So I don't know, surprisingly or not, I don't find myself drawing on that for sort of motivation. I think but it is a source for me. Like, I'm proud of myself. Like I said, I was the band geek who was like kind of hiding in the background of everything, and to really kind of step up my game and do something bold like that was out of character for me, and was like a nice accomplishment. I think the part that I always kind of come back to is that part I was talking about of sort of like getting stuck in those stories in your mind. And that shows up a lot in what I think a lot about, how easy it is to get trapped and pulled away by what our mind tells us. And that's a huge piece of my practice of like helping people just kind of experience life outside of those stories, which can also be a scary place if you're used to kind of living in those places. So I think appreciating how quickly they can take over, and how much they can sort of be the lens through which you see the world, is something to take away too, of you know, just kind of that sense that it's really only a moment away that we can get pulled off into something like that. I hope that answers your question.
That's terrific. Thank you so much.
Anybody else have questions for Mindy or for us?
Well, I'll just provide a fun fact. Hi, Mindy. Yeah, I've known Mindy and her older sister, Melissa, since kindergarten, actually. And it is funny because, you know, when Mindy said she didn't really do outside in school, which was true other than band, but her sister did track and running, and now their roles have switched. Now Melissa doesn't run at all, and Mindy has sort of taken that over and doing enough running for all of us now, I think, actually.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, do you have a friend that needs to say hello?
What? Somebody, as you said that, somebody just poked my leg with their nose, so I'm gonna bring them up here. Come here, buddy. You wanna say hi? You wanna say hi? Okay. Come here, big guy. Trapper.
Hey, Trapper.
Hey,
Trapper. So cute. I assume Hawkeye is somewhere losing in front of the fire.
Yeah, that is exactly right. No, I think he's in front of the sun, in the open door, completely relaxing.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for joining us here, and everybody, thank you for coming on. And I will let you get back to your Wednesday. So Wonderful to see you, Mindy.
Awesome. You too.
Job.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Hey, Mindy.
Bye, Mindy.
Stop recording.